Susan Shillinglaw, San Jose State University, reading Chapter 15 of Cannery Row. By the time the boys got up to the farmhouse, Mac was in the kitchen. The pointer bitch lay on her side, and Mac held a cloth saturated with Epsom salts against her tick bite. Among her legs, the big fat wiener pups nuzzled and bumped for milk, and the bitch looked patiently up into Mac's face, saying, "You see how it is. I try to tell him, but he doesn't understand." The captain held a lamp and looked down on Mac. "I'm glad to know about that," he said. Mac said, "I don't want to tell you about your business, sir, but these pups ought to be weaned. She ain't got a hell of a lot of milk left, and them pups are chewing her to pieces." "I know," said the captain. "I suppose I should have drowned them all but one. I've been so busy trying to keep the place going, people don't take the interest in bird dogs they used to. It's all poodles and boxers and Dobermans." "I know," said Mac, "and there ain't no dog like a pointer for a man. I don't know what's coming over people, but you wouldn't have drowned them, would you, sir?" "Well," said the captain, "since my wife went into politics, I'm just running crazy. She got elected to the assembly for this district, and when the legislature isn't in session, she's off making speeches, and when she's home, she's studying all the time and writing bills. Must be lousy and, it must be pretty lonely," said Mac. "Now, if I had a pup like this," he picked up a squirming, puzz-faced pup, "why, I bet I'd have a real bird dog in 3 years. I'd take a bitch every time." "Would you like to have one?" the captain asked. Mac looked up. "You mean you'd let me have one? Oh, Jesus Christ, yes." "Take your pick," said the captain. "Nobody seems to understand bird dogs anymore." The boys stood in the kitchen and gathered quick impressions. It was obvious the wife was away. The open cans, the frying pan with lace from fried eggs still sticking to it, the crumbs on the kitchen table, the open box of shotgun shells and the bread box all shrieked of the lack of a woman, while the white curtains and the papers on the dish shelves and the 2 small towels on the rack told them a woman had been there. And they were unconsciously glad she wasn't there. The kind of woman who puts papers on shelves and had little towels like that instinctively distrusted and disliked Mac and the boys. Such a woman knew that they were the worst threats to a home, for they offered ease and thought and companionship, as opposed to neatness, order, and properness. They were very glad she was away. Now the captain seemed to feel that they were doing him a favor. He didn't want them to leave. He said hesitantly, "Suppose you boys would like to have a little something to warm you up before you go out for the frogs?" The others looked at Mac. Mac was frowning, as though he was thinking it through. "Well, when we're out doing scientific stuff, we make it kind of a rule not to touch nothing," he said. And then quickly, as though he might have gone too far, "But seeing as how you've been so nice to us, well, I wouldn't mind a short one myself. I don't know about the boys." The boys agreed they wouldn't mind a short one either. The captain got a flashlight and went down to the cellar. They could hear him moving lumber and boxes about, and he came back upstairs with a 5-gallon oak keg in his arms. He set it on the table. "During Prohibition, I got some corn whiskey and laid it away. I just got to thinking I'd like to see how it is. It's pretty old now. I almost forgot about it. You see, my wife—" And then he let it go at that, because it was apparent they understood. The captain knocked the oak plug from the end of the keg and got glasses down from the shelf that had scallop-edged paper laid on it. It's a hard job to pour a small drink from a 5-gallon keg. Each of them got half a water glass of clear brown liquid. They waited ceremoniously for the captain and then said, "Over the river," and tossed it back. They swallowed, tasted over their tongues, supped their lips, and there was a faraway look in their eyes. Mac peered into his empty glass as though some holy message were written in the bottom, and then he raised his eyes. "Can't say nothing about that," he said. "They don't put that in bottles." He breathed in deeply and sucked his breath as it came out. "I don't think I ever tasted nothing as good as that," he said. The captain looked pleased. His glance wandered back to the keg. "It is good," he said. "You think we might have another little one?" Mac stared into his glass again. "Maybe a short one. he agreed. Wouldn't it be easier to pour out some in a pitcher? You're liable to spill it that way. 2 hours later, they recalled what they had come for. The frog pool was square, 50 feet wide and 70 feet long and 4 feet deep. Lush, soft grass grew about its edge, and a little ditch brought water from the river to it, and from it little ditches went out into the orchards. There were frogs there, all right, thousands of them. Their voices beat the night. They boomed and barked and croaked and rattled. They sang to the stars, to the waning moon, to the waving grasses. They bellowed love songs and challenges. The men crept through the darkness toward the pool. The captain carried a nearly filled pitcher of whiskey, and every man had his own glass. The captain had found them flashlights that worked. Huey and George carried gunny sacks. As they drew quietly near, the frogs heard them coming. The night had been roaring with frog song, and then suddenly it was silent. Mac and the boys and the captain sat down on the ground to have one last short one and to map their campaign, and the plan was bold. During the millennia that frogs and men have lived in the same world, it's probable that men have hunted frogs. And during that time, a pattern of hunt and parry has developed. The man with the net or the bow or the lance or the gun creeps noiselessly, as he thinks, toward the frog. The pattern requires that the frog sit very still, and wait. The rules of the game require the frog to wait until the final flicker of a second, when the net is descending, when the lance is in the air, when the figure squeezes the trigger. Then the frog jumps, plops into the water, swims to the bottom, and waits until the man goes away. That is the way it's done, the way it has always been done. Frogs have a right to expect it will always be done that way. Now and then the net's too quick, the lance pierces, the gun flicks, and the frog is gone, but it's all fair and in the framework. Frogs don't resent that. But how could they have anticipated Mac's new method? How could they have foreseen the horror that followed? The sudden flashing of lights, the shouting and squealing of men, the rush of feet. Every frog leaped, plopped into the pool, and swam frantically to the bottom. Then into the pool plunged the line of men, stamping, churning, moving in a crazy line up the pool, flinging their feet about. Hysterically, the frogs displaced from their placid spots swam ahead of the crazy, thrashing feet, and the feet came on. Frogs are good swimmers, but they haven't much endurance. Down the pool they went until finally they were bunched and crowded against the end, and the feet and the wildly plunging bodies followed them. A few frogs lost their heads and floundered among the feet and got through, and those were safe. But the majority decided to leave this pool forever, to find a new home in a new country where this kind of thing didn't happen. A wave of frantic, frustrated frogs, big ones, little ones, brown ones, green ones, men frogs and women frogs, a wave of them broke over the bank, crawled, leaped, scrambled. They clambered up the grass, they clutched at each other, little ones rode on big ones, and then, horror on horror, the flashlights found them. 2 men gathered them like berries. The line came out of the water and closed in on their rear and gathered them like potatoes. 10s and 50s of them were flung into the gunny sacks, and the sacks filled with tired, frightened, and disillusioned frogs, with dripping, quivering frogs. Some got away, of course, and some had been saved in the pool. But never in frog history had such an execution taken place. Frogs by the pound, by the 50 pounds. They weren't counted, but there must have been 600 or 700. Then happily, Mac tied up the necks of the sacks. They were soaking, dripping wet, and the air was cool. They had a short one in the grass before they went back to the house so they wouldn't catch cold. It's doubtful whether the captain had ever had so much fun. He was indebted to Mac and the boys. Later, when the curtains caught fire and were put out with little towels, the captain told the boys not to mind it. He felt it was an honor to have them burn his house clear down if they wanted to. "My wife is a wonderful woman," he said, in a kind of peroration. "Most wonderful woman. Ought to have been a man. If she was a man, I wouldn't have married her. He laughed a long time over that and repeated it 3 or 4 times and resolved to remember it so he could tell it to a lot of other people. He filled a jug with whiskey and gave it to Mac. He wanted to go live with them in the palace flophouse. He decided his wife would like Mac and the boys if she only knew them. Finally, he went to sleep on the floor with his head among the puppies. Mac and the boys poured themselves a short one and regarded him seriously. Mac said, "He gave me that jug of whiskey, didn't he? You heard him." "Sure he did," said Eddie. "I heard him." "And he gave me a pup." "Sure, pick of the litter. We all heard him. Why?" "I never did roll a drunk, and I ain't going to start now," said Mac. "We got to get him out of here. He's going to wake up feeling lousy, and he's going to be all our fault. I just don't want to be here." Mac glanced at the burned curtains, at the floor glistening with whiskey and puppy dirt, at the bacon grease that was coagulating on the stove front. He went to the pups, looked them over carefully, felt bone and frame, looked in the eyes, regarded jaws, and picked out a beautifully spotted bitch with liver-covered nose and fine dark yellow eye. "Come on, darling," he said. They blew out the lamp because of the danger of fire. It was just turning dawn as they left the house. "I don't think I ever had such a fine trip," said Mac, "but I got thinking about his wife coming back, and it gave me the shivers." The pup whined in his arms, and he put it under his coat. "He's a real nice fellow," said Mac. "After you get him feeling easy, that is." He strode on to the place where they had parked the Ford. "We shouldn't go forgetting we're doing all of this for Doc," he said. "From the way things are panning out, it looks like Doc is a pretty lucky guy."